founders believed that human beings have certain inalienable rights by birthright. In other words, it defines the human. Humans have rights. The state doesn't give them. The job of the state is to guard them so that we can exercise our rights. So it doesn't matter what your age are. Whatever your age, if you're a human being, you have these fundamental inalienable rights. That doesn't mean that you have the freedom to exercise the rights as fully in a public school as you do in a public park. You don't. And there are good reasons why there have got to be limits on rights in a school. It's a school. It's not an open forum where people can say whatever they want, right? Including teachers. Nevertheless, that doesn't mean that people don't have the rights. The question is, how far are they free to exercise these inalienable rights, freedom of speech, religious liberty, and so forth? And the answer can't be, not at all. Because if that's the answer, then it makes a mockery of the commitment to fundamental rights for all human beings, if that's the answer. Unfortunately, that's the answer in many schools. So, these stories illustrate, and many more. I could go on all day with the stories of young people who have changed our country, but these stories illustrate that far from being a nuisance that we need to control, students of conscience who dare to speak up for justice have always been and are now our best hope for changing what is wrong and unjust in this society and in societies around the world. Notice who was behind those revolutions, the so-called Arab Spring. A lot of people who dumped using the media. That's not an accident. That's the story of history. Very often the story of history. As you know, you may remember last year was the 50th anniversary of the sit-in demonstration at lunch counters, Woolworth lunch counters in Greensboro, North Carolina, my home state. A sit-in that changed America. What we need to remember is that demonstrators at those sit-ins were college students. And interestingly enough, when the summer came, and those college students had to go back home, wherever they were from, guess who went and sat on those stools? High school students. We forget this. I don't know what, I guess because people are older now who were alive back then, we think, well, everybody was kind of, old veteran civil rights advocates. No, they were you. That's who they were. They were you. And they sat on those counters, they sat in on those stools, and people spit. People hit them, people called them names, and they just sat there. They just sat there. And they sat there and they sat there until finally they won. And I remember what Martin Luther King said more than once about those students who refused to move from those lunch counter seats. The same thing he said about those students, I think, could be said about Billy, about Barbara, about Mary Beth, and about many other students who have the courage to follow their conscience and act in their convictions. This is what he said. From a number of his speeches, but actually, the last time he said it was the day before he was killed. The last speeches he gave. He said, when students all over the South started sitting in at lunch counters, I knew that as they were sitting in, they were really standing up for the best in the American dream. They were taking the whole nation back to those great wells of democracy which were dug deep by the Founding Fathers in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. So free spirits, let that be said of you. Don't let anyone tell you that you don't have the rights, or that you're too young to count, or too selfish to care. When you see injustice or censorship or discrimination, use your voice. Speak out for freedom, for justice, not just for yourselves, but for others. And have the courage to act on your convictions. Have the courage to stand up for the cause of conscience. So thank you for what you're doing, for who you are, but more importantly, thank you for what you will do for freedom.